Okay, let me try it again. Do it both audio and visual. I want to say a few words. Today's Wednesday for Mishpacha Stefanski, as we do every week. This is separate from the Gnozim stuff. And truth is, I have this ladies' class in the morning, and they say Mikom Lam de Eskalti. For the questions you get, stirs your thinking. And I want to share a couple ideas which have to do with our parsha this week, but it's not a parsha share per se. More has to do with kind of what I regard as a broad historical look at a certain existential tension. Now, after all those generalizations, Pasuk says, "Rei anochi anosin lechem hayom bracha kola." We all know that, but what's he talking about? So usually, as I understand it, when you read this, you say the Moshe Rabbeinu says, "I'm giving you mitzvahs, and if you keep the mitzvahs, it'll be chayim. And if you don't keep the mitzvah, it'll be death," and so on and so forth. It's like a from sort of interpretation, and that's okay with me. That works too, but not exactly. Rather, if you just take a look at the physical representation of the parsha, it precedes the main body of the information that Moshe Rabbeinu is talking about, and that has to do with what happens to the Jews when they enter the land of Israel. So, in other words, when Moshe says, "I'm giving you a bracha and a klola," and especially he says, "Habracha asher tishmal mitzvahs Hashem asher nechi mitzavchem hayom," that the bracha has to do with what I'm telling you today. Not all 613 mitzvahs, what I'm telling you today. Now, I know you can read about Harivel and Hagrizim, I get it, but I'm talking about if you look at it straight. And the klola is, if you don't listen, B'sartim and aderech asher nechi mitzavchem hayom, if you depart from the way I'm telling you today, to follow other gods. So the bracha and the klola has to be something quite specific. And it goes on to say, if you continue to read the parsha, that I'm talking, Moshe Rabbeinu says, when you get to Israel. Right? When they get to Israel. So when you come and conquer Israel from the Zion Umos, it's going to be opportunity but also danger. And therefore it could be that your entry in Kibush of Eretz Israel could be a klola. It could be a klola. It could also be a bracha. How would it be a klola? How would it be a curse? If you go the wrong way. And he goes on to say, just interesting, that you got to follow certain rules and regulations when you get to Israel. If you follow them, then everything will be okay and it'll be a bracha. If you don't follow the rules and regulations, the protocols, it'll be a klola, it'll be a curse. And those are the words. Atem over sayardim levo l'reshes haaretz v'yirishtem ba v'yishavtem ba. You'll settle in Israel because I, Moshe Rabbeinu, am not going to be able to lead you. For 40 years, Moses knows he's not going to lead the Jews, but he always figures he can get God to change his mind. Only now, recently, what Vaschana, and therefore God said, "I'm not going to change your mind." So this is it. Ushmartem lasas achukim mishpatim asher nochi nosin lefnei chayim. You should keep the chukim and the mishpatim that I'm commanding you today. Now, to be honest, when you and I read this, so much of Dvarim, especially when you get to the first four parts, Dvarim Vaschana, they can be repetitive, saying the same thing over and over again. So you see, Moshe Rabbeinu is like desperate. He doesn't want the Jews go off the derech. He knows that they will go off the derech. He actually says that before he dies. Ki adati ki achri mosi hashchim tashchis tashchisim misartim min aderech hashanuchi b'tziviyaseschem. I know that. And therefore, like a good parent, he's admonishing them again and again and again to keep the mitzvahs. However, you don't have to read it that way, but rather focus it, and this week's parsha happens to be, on what's coming afterwards. Meaning, if you want what's about to happen to be a bracha, not a call, you have to follow certain rules and regulations specific to Eretz Yisrael. And he goes on to say, Eila chukim mishpatim sheish malasos. This is the set of chukim mishpatim. And what's that? So what I spoke about the other day. Destroy all the avodah zarah. I mean, literally. Abe tabdunas kol makomas yeshavdu sham hagoyim asher yoshim es Elohim. Make sure you destroy, like I went in great detail the other day. Don't just repurpose the churches or the pagan temples and use them for Jewish purposes. Destroy them, okay? Try to make as much as possible there's not a trace left of them. He goes on to say it. L'shar shachrim, as the Gemara says. Al-harm begum, nitatztem mizbechoseim, shibartem mizmatzivoseim, and so on and so forth. In English, break apart the altars, smash the pillars, sacred trees burn in fire, the carved images cut down, and obliterate their names from that place. Okay? So, in other words, that's what we spoke about. That Moshe says, I'm worried that you go to Israel, which is the promised land, and it's a land flowing with milk and honey, but it's also a land flowing with avodah zarah. It's Eretz Zavas Chavod Vash, that's true, but it's also Eretz Zavas avodah zarah. It just is, especially between the Canaanite, Murray, priests, and Yebusi, and so forth. And I'm worried, especially without me being there to lead you, he says, that you'll be seduced by this kind of stuff. You follow the gods. So wouldn't that be a bummer? You got out of Egypt, you did 10 plagues, you crossed the Red Sea, you got the Torah, you marched 40 years in the desert with Anania covered and all the mon and all the miracles, and everything was okay. And then when you finally got to Eretz Yisrael, that's where you went down the tubes. Which, by the way, happened, as you and I know, as you read the Nach. But I'm just saying, he's warning about it over here. And then he goes on to say, Lo sasun kein l'Hashem Elokechem, don't do this to Hashem. So what does it mean? Don't do this to Hashem. Besides the halachic stuff, what does it mean? Plain, straightforward. Don't do this to Hashem. He goes on to spell out what that means, which is don't have bamos. Don't do what the Canaanites did and the others, which is set up idols under every tree and on every hill and so forth and so on, because that will lead you to go astray. But rather, centralize in a radical fashion the worship of God and the karbonos. Only go there. And all the sacrifice and all that business you do over there. And that's where you eat, all the karbonos, the smachtem, and that's where you have the simcha b'chol mishlach yedchem. It's all supposed to take place in one specific place. Lo sasun kishka yashabata, and don't do it hefker. Everybody does whatever he wants. So Moshe Rabbeinu is not a Thomas Jefferson, believes in individual liberty, and ishkacha yashabein aviyaseh. Although that's what happened, as you know, the famous verses at the end of the book of Judges, book of Shoftim, Bayamim lahem ein melch b'Yisrael ishkacha yashabein aviyaseh. So Moshe says, I don't want that, but that's what happened anyway. But that's because the Torah is telling you the truth. It's not our scroll. It's telling you the bad stuff that happened. But Moshe is warning against it. And it's very interesting. The way he warns it against it is through this model of highly centralization. In other words, when you go to Israel, we'll choose one place. It'll be a Beis Hamikdash, and that's the only place you do karbanos. Okay, so to use other language, Isser Habamos versus Heter Habamos. You're allowed to have your own private altars and that sort of thing. So here we see that Moshe Rabbeinu says, I don't trust anybody, and therefore, Lo Sazon King Hashem Elokechem, do not go and set up your own shuls and all the rest of it, but have one central place, and that's where the karbonos and all the other stuff, and smachtem, and that's where the religious rituals take place, and so on and so forth. Now, that's a very interesting model, because what it means is that in biblical Judaism, it's very cultish in the sense, not in a bad sense of cult, but in the sense of it's a sacrificial cult, which is take place in one place under the supervision of the priests, and their job is to manage and control the sacrificial system so that the people don't follow the Canaanite in other ways, which they were tempted to follow when they came there. And even if they knock down the, how's it go? If they chop down all the idols and all the other things like that, and the pagan temples, but still there'll be something left of it in you, and syncretistically, you'll introduce pagan ideas into Judaism, and Moshe Rabbeinu said, I don't want it. That'll be a slippery slope. Now, the idea behind that is, it seems to me, that he's afraid, as time goes on, let me see what they did in terms of their style of worship, their rituals, and let me apply it to Judaism. So a person will say this, what's wrong if I want to do this? And I'm not doing it for another god. I'm not doing it for Zeus or Isis or Osiris or any of that kind of stuff, or Buddha. I'm doing it for Rebbeinu Shalom. So what's the problem? And as we know, in the Chumash, God gave detailed instructions on how to do the karbanos. Otherwise, you wouldn't have all these Gemaras and Kachim uh, and Tyrus. They're very detailed instructions, and they are meant, the Rambam asserts, to sort of weave in between the Sil and Sheripitus, the dangerous extremes that sacrificial cults bring with them, and do it in a safe way. So to put in simple language, Moshe Rabbeinu, I'm telling you, if you follow these rules and regulations, it'll be a bracha. If you don't, it'll be a klola, because who knows what you'll introduce over there. So the idea, as I understand it, is, a farmer will come and settle in the land, let's say in Ephraim or Menashe, and it'll be a place that used to belong to a Kanani and Mori priest, Yibusi, and he'll see a mizbeach of some sort or another, an altar, and even when he knocks it down, he'll say, what was it used for? And the answer will be for, let's say, human sacrifice, right, which was very popular, for example, and he'll say, so let me do a human sacrifice also. I got 9 kids from 3 wives. I can take one, I don't mind, and we'll shecht one for this and this, for the Bamah Shalom, not for a foreign god. That was the problem of the Canaanites. You know what I'm saying? The mistake will be that the Jews will say, Moshe Rabbeinu warns, it's not simply the goal of the religious cult was wrong, which was to a pagan deity. People won't realize that the rituals themselves, the means to the end, were also abhorrent. And so, I'm sure this must have happened. Some guy goes to the base of Mikdash, because Moshe says, don't do that. I want you to centralize it all in one place. You got to go there. And so, as the Rambam points out, the temple is a controlled area. The priests are trained, Aaron, Bnei Aaron, and a guy shows up, let's say, from Reuven. That's very far away. Reuven, you got to go up the Ever Yarden and cross, and then go to Yerushalayim. And the Kohen said, how do you do? Good morning. He says, I'm here to bring a carbon. And the Kohen says, what's your carbon? He says, this is my Bechor, my firstborn. Right? So, I'm sure it must be job training with the Kohanim. Sort of like, Lubavitcher, don't lose your cool. And the Kohen says, actually, what can I tell you? It's not a good idea. It's a good thought. You like in the Kuzri, Kavanas Chavetzuya, Masech Ein Retzuya. It's not a bad idea. I mean, I know you mean well. We don't do that in Jewish religion. Why not? Why not? Etem Bechor, pre-Bitni. What's wrong with that? The people lived in my land before him did that. My neighbors, if he's in Reuven, he's living next to Moab, Ammon, Edom, and all these other things. They do that. What's wrong? Well, the Kohen says, you see, let me tell you something. There's a story called Akedah Yitzhak, which took place right here where we're standing, he tells the guy. Because the base of Mikdash is built in Har Maria. And that's where the Akedah is supposed to have taken place. And so you see over here, Abraham long ago, maybe you don't know the story. How can you not know the story? Don't ask that question. People don't know the story. Everybody knows the story. And he was told by Hashem to do it. Yitzhak, at the last minute, Hashem said, don't do it. I'm not interested in human sacrifices. It's not when we go. Now, if you want to get an animal, or you bring a carbon mincha, that's the difference. So we're very happy to take it from you. And so, what I just show you, by centralizing and regulating the sacrificial cult, you prevent abuses of the ritual. You see? And the guy I was talking about didn't mean to abuse it in a bad way. It was an Amar, so he didn't know. He didn't mean bad. You're saying so he's doing the right thing. So if you have a Bamah, who's to tell him? And for all I know, and for all you know, in the time of the Tanakh, when they had these Bamahs, very vague. Who knows what the heck they did? We know in Yerushalayim, there were places outside the temple in which they did Molech and human sacrifices. The Nevi'im complained about it. In fact, Gehenna is a place where they used to beat the drums when they did they burned the children alive. So people keep on with craziest things, especially when it comes to religion, especially if everybody consider that religiously normal. And so Moshe Rabbeinu saying like this, then it'll become a klola. Therefore, I don't trust you, and I'm telling you the way to do this is in a controlled environment. This is the attitude of regulators throughout history. It is the attitude of science and, let's say, public health authorities. it runs against the countervailing dynamic of Ish Kachaya Shabena Vyasa. Don't tell me what to do. I'm going to do it myself. Don't overregulate me. You and I witnessed this recently in the corona, in the COVID. The public health people are saying, don't walk around without a mask. Listen, I'm in Baltimore. What can I tell you? Don't walk around in a mask and, have keep space away. In the beginning, they told you have to wash the stuff that comes from the supermarket, so forth. They're trying to deal with the problem through l'shichno sacrificial shama, through regulation, centralization, right? It was up to that. People say the only place you can smoke is in this building, and there will be doctors there, and they say, okay, you want to smoke, but we want to give you literature about how bad smoking, something like that, you see? So we want you to bring Karbonis in a place where it'll be a trained staff called B'nai Aaron, and they're going to tell you, what to do and what not to do. And Moshe Rabbeinu is saying this before he dies. So he's saying, Eila chukim mishpatim. If you keep these, then kol yamim asher chayim al adama. You got to keep this all the time you're in Israel. Otherwise, it'll go bad. And I'll say it again. If you know the story of the Nevi'im, what it says in the Bible, the Old Testament now, it went bad. So it is very interesting that the Re'eh is going in this direction. And I'm describing sort of an existential tension. And Moshe stands on one side of it, on the regulatory side, on the centralization side. In actual Jewish history, it's very unclear, but we have, rabbinic sources that they say that sometimes Bamahs were okay and sometimes Bamahs were not okay. If I remember correctly, in the first 14 years, with Heter Bamahs, the Bamahs were okay. And then when they set up the Mishkan, a couple hundred years, the Bamahs were not okay. And then when the Mishkan was destroyed, in the Shiloh, and then when the Philistines destroyed the Mishkan, I think, then the Bamahs again were okay, until they rebuilt the base of Mikdash, something like that, time of Shmuel Aleph. And Shmuel Aleph and Shmuel Beis, until Shlomo Melech rebuilt or built the base of Mikdash in Jerusalem. And then that was the end of that. Then it's Israel Bamahs. And you go to what he said, L'shechno sedu shel shama, and everything is highly controlled and highly centralized. So you want to bring a carbon, you got to schleppzich to Yerushalayim, whether you like it or not. And you have to bring this and this carbon, and you have to undergo this purification ritual, and you do it all in Jerusalem, and it's subject to the control of the Kohanim, etc., etc., etc. Right? Fine. And there is a couple Das Yochids out there in the Chazal, but that's basically the way we understand it. And so what that means is, for a majority of Jewish history, it's supposed to be this Moses way. But that's not what happened, because you know and I know, when you read the Tanakh, people had Bamahs. You can sort of coordinate them if you want to with what I just told you. For example, when Saul meets Samuel and they're having that festival, the celebration, it's after the destruction of Shiloh, so that would work together. However, there are other people that build Bamahs. And anyway, more to the point, throughout the Tanakh, throughout the book of Malachim and Divrei Yomim, when they talk about the kings of Israel, it always says, Rach HaBamas Lo Saru. Now, the kingdom split into two parts, the north and the south. The north was Avodah Zarah, so there's nothing to talk about. But the south, the Malchus Yehuda, had a base of Mikdash, so there's what to talk about. So they had it, and it wasn't even that far away. Meaning, sadly, once the kingdom of Judah was set up, which was only the area of Yehuda and Benjamin, basically, so the base of Mikdash is walkable, so to speak. It wasn't a question of the Galil anymore, the Eber Yardim, because that was in the Malchus Yisrael. And you remember, Yeroboam ben Nevat and all the kings had a Berlin Wall that blocked anybody from the north even traveling to the south. So, for a couple hundred years, you had a base of Mikdash. But none of the kings of the south, with two exceptions, got rid of the Bamahs. People just didn't want to do it. It's like trying to get rid of guns. People say, it's my constitutional right. Right? Habamas lo saru. Only Chizkiyahu and Yoshio, I believe, actually got rid of the Bamahs. And this was highly resented. The reason I say resented is, if you remember, the book of Yeshaya, and maybe also in Melachim, when Rabshakeh, the enemy general, comes and speaks to the representatives of King Chizkiyahu, the Assyrian invasion of Sancherib, he said, God is angry at you, the people say, because you got rid of the Bamahs. So they, misunderstood it. Now, why? How? There's an existential dynamic that I want to dive into my own shul. I don't want to dive into the big shul. It doesn't work for me. Maybe Rosh Hashanah and Kippur I'll daven big shul, but I like the shtibel in my blood. I like the small minion or something like that. A person says you want the immediate experience, and not the formal centralized one that is the center of the whole cultish, ritualistic enterprise. Again, I'm using the word cult in the technical sense, not in the bad sense. Uh, and people say like this, if I have to wait till I get my act together and bring my karbonos to Yerushalayim, and it'll be 6 months, a year, whatever it was, that doesn't work for me. I want one in my backyard. My son's having a bar mitzvah. I'd like to make it into a carbon situation. I'm not going to schlep to Yerushalayim, and they won't take me. They won't have a bar mitzvah with my son. So I'd rather do one in my backyard or in my little village, and all my neighbors can help. And it'll be a frum occasion. It won't be to other gods or anything like that. It'll be to the Borei Olam, the creator of the world. So what's your problem, right? The people couldn't see anything wrong with the Bamahs, and as a matter of fact, they preferred this. So here we are. I'm simply calling attention to the fact that in the history of religion, maybe in general, and certainly the history of Judaism, which is what we're concentrating on here today, obviously, there's always a tension between, and it's existential, between the desire for a large central sort of thing, and controlled and regulated, and making sure through the controls that there are no abuses, versus the immediate experience. What they call in German Offenbarung, right? The immediate experience, in which you feel something emotional. And I'm doing emotional because it's in my backyard and I have all my relatives there, and we're taking pictures and all the rest of it. It speaks to me, and that's where my father had his bar mitzvah or wedding or whatever it was, or the bris, and that's where my kids are and the grandchildren, and that's in the tribe of Reuben. That's in Menashe. That's in God. It's not in Yerushalayim. You understand? And so it's interesting that the words of Moses were not adhered to in the first temple period for the most part. I don't know if the Frumis did it or not. It's no way to tell. It was adhered to in the second temple period. That's interesting. In other words, when you come by Sheni, there's no more Bamos. As far as we know, not a trace of them. And instead, there is the high centralization of the sacrificial ritual in the great temple in Jerusalem, the Bayis Sheni. This may be why the Navi says the second temple would be more chashuv than the first. It wasn't competing with Bamos. So what do you do about the immediate experience? The desire for a Bama that Moses is warning against. So here we have the history of the evolution of Judaism. And if you think about it, in the second temple period, since they got rid of the Yetzer Hara Avodah Zarah, maybe they figured, the words of Moshe aren't going to be a danger anymore. No, this coming there, this role won't be a klola, because you're not going to go after Elohim Achim Ashali Yadatem, which they did not do in the second temple period. But on the other hand, you can't have it, it seems to me, that here comes Rosh Hashanah, for example, and Yom Kippur, and all the action in biblical Judaism takes place in the temple. I don't live in the temple. Let's say I live in Eber Yardi, or let's say I live in the Galil, or something like that. Naphtali, Yisachar, Zebulun, Dan, Naphtali, Gadash, all those tribes up there. How are you going to schlep to Yerushalayim? It's not the Shalosh Regalim either. So, how do you celebrate Rosh Hashanah? You wake up in the morning, like I always say, you take care of your animals, and then you blow the shofar. And actually, you blow the shofar really like Tekiah, Tekiah 3 times. You know all that, right? So that takes a minute. Do it 3 times, and you're done. It's before the Mea Kolas, evolved. What kind of Rosh Hashanah is that? And Yom Kippur. What kind of Yom Kippur is that? Is no shul, no davening, no nothing? Oh, don't worry. In the Beis HaMikdash, they're handling all that. If you tell me Yom Kippur, so there's a lot of highly symbolic, and dramatic avodas Yom Kippur. No. Okay. Rosh Hashanah. You can't tell me anybody here how many karbanos are brought in Rosh Hashanah, what are they, and how many bulls and how many lambs and all the rest of it. And it don't mean nothing to anybody. It's not Yom Hadin. It's not Nisana Tokef. It doesn't grab you. Even though it is true, mi yichya mi yamus, mi bekitzo lo bekitzo, but you don't feel it. How can you? So I'm just trying to say that an existential angst had to be there, and you're trying to produce a religious feeling among the masses On the other hand, by insisting that the ritual be restricted to one place, it's like counterproductive. And so the result is there evolves in the Second Temple period the synagogue. The synagogue. I've spoken about this in the past. The very word synagogue is a Greek word, so it sounds like it popped up when the Greeks took over Israel. Maybe it's another working of an earlier word, maybe Knesset, it's hard to tell. Maybe somebody started in Bavel, in the Golos Bavel, hard to tell. But there had to be something to respond to this existential need. You can't simply go the Moshe route. You have over here, which is a good route, and it says only do the karbonis in such and such an environment where the karbonis will not be misused or abused for and lead you off the derech. I get it, but who says? Isn't it interesting that during the Second Temple period, it begins tefillah? The Rambam said very famously, I don't know where the Rambam gets it from, as I always say, but that at the beginning of the Second Temple period, they invent the Shemona Esrei, the Amida, for certain reasons. Okay, so now you have the Amida. Well, so how does this work? So you start, once you say there's such a thing called formal prayer, so what they were saying was, let me think about this. Once you tell me it's formal prayer, so how does that fit in with the Karbonah system that Moshe will be talking about here, where Moshe says nothing at all whatsoever about prayer, formal prayer? Clearly, they evolved, as happens, because Judaism is an evolving religion in some aspects, not in others, obviously. That's where we disappeared with Reform Judaism. And the idea that everything and all action should take place, that little by little got modified and went into desuetude when the temple was destroyed, obviously. This intermediate period is interesting. We always associate the synagogue with a diaspora phenomenon, meaning that in the Bayis Rishon period, all the Jews lived in Eretz Yisrael, but not in the Bayis Sheni period. It's very likely that a rove of the Jewish people lived in Chutz La'aretz. More people lived outside of Israel than Israel, diaspora as they call it. Think about how many Jews lived in Bavel, especially if you go like Duras Rishonim by Victor Miller, he said there was a vast number. But other places, well, in the Middle East, the huge Jewish communities in Egypt, in Asia Minor, in the Greek cities, and, Rome, all over the place. So how do they do Judaism? How does it happen? Those are people, they ain't never going to have l'shich no sacrificial shama. It's not going to happen over there. They live too far away. I mean, it's theoretically possible, but, somebody lives in Rome maybe once in their life, maybe twice, to go see Beis Hamikdash, but not regularly. So how does that work? You understand? There had to be something to respond to this existential need, and what popped up to fill the place was something you and I call the synagogue. So it's an interesting history of the Jewish people with the formal and non-formal, synagogue representing the non-formal, the temple representing the formal. In the Bayis Rishon period, the same existential angst was there, and the same existential need was there, but it displayed itself, it manifested itself in terms of Bamos, which Moshe Rabbeinu disapproves of over here, because he says it's going to lead you astray, and it will lead you into syncretism, and it did. Okay, by the time you finish the Bayis Rishon period, all the people, such a large number of people are into Avodah Zarah of one kind or another, and the sickest kind. My goodness, if you know the Tanakh, the sick dog stuff. So that didn't work out, and it confirmed what Moshe said, which is if you don't keep it all concentrated based on it'll be a klola, not a bracha. The sacrificial system and all that will be a klola, not a bracha. In the Second Temple period, it couldn't turn into that kind of a klola because there was no Yitzhar Avodah Zarah. And that seems to be a historic fact. On the other hand, what do I do about the fact that I want an immediate religious experience? Already at the very beginning of the temple, Second Temple, they already start what you and I would call minions, davening, tefillah. The synagogue, as it evolved, we don't know exactly. We know what it ended up as, which is a place of Torah and tefillah. By that I mean, the original synagogue, I think, was a place he read the Torah. So if it's Chutz La'aretz, it has a certain characteristic to it, which is I live in Egypt or in Rome or someplace like that, and I'm Jewish and I'm living here for Parnos. I want my children to be Jewish. I want them to know about Judaism. But the only place you do Judaism is in the Beis Hamikdash. So how are we ever going to do that? And so I'm going to get together with a couple of the people in the town I live, and we'll create something called the place we get together, and we read and discuss. The Torah, which we break up into Parsha Shavua. You see how this evolved? In some places, a 3-year cycle, other cycle, and we have the discussion is led by somebody called Maturguman, because that's basically what the Maturguman is. You're talking about the Parsha. It's also true that they said there's a Deraisa for saying Krishma, so you already start to see how it evolved. There's a place to read a portion of the Bible and also recite the Shema together. And then the Anshe Chazal came up with something called the Shemona Esrei in some form or another. And you already see the skeleton forming, and then the flesh is going to apply itself to the skeletons, as in the famous vision of Ezekiel, right? The what's it called? The dry bones. Some would say Yevashis. And eventually, this takes over Judaism when the temple is destroyed. In the second temple, it's interesting historically, in the second temple period, for a long time, the area in which the Jews lived was pretty darn close to Yerushalayim. You could have it that you keep the system that Moshe Man is talking about. And you don't have to worry about Avodah Zarah because it wasn't Avodah Zarah in the second temple period. Let me just see here. I have the rusty, trusty, new Art Scroll Stone Chumash. Where are the maps over here? Trying to make a point. And that is, let's just use this. This is the Aseret HaShatim, which was not the case in the Second Temple period. But here's Jerusalem. The entire Jewish community lived, I'd say, 20, 30 miles in the circumference of Yerushalayim. That's how it was under Cyrus and the Persians. That's how it was in the Maccabean Wars. That's why all the battles of Judah Maccabee, were in the vicinity of Yerushalayim, right? Beit Horon, this place, that place, Emos, they're all right near Jerusalem. So in that case, because Rov of Klal Yisrael didn't move to Israel, so you could have it for a couple hundred years that they mamish kept l'shichno sidu b'Shama. So if I was the Jewish farmer I described before, and it's a Yom Kippur, it's not so hard if I am determined to go from Modi'in, for example, to Yerushalayim, or even from a little south of that. By the time I'm talking about, Beersheba was under the Edomites in the Second Temple period. So from Hebron to Yerushalayim, it's not that far. It's not like from Tzfas, you understand? And certainly not from the Eber Yarning. Excuse me. So maybe they kept that up. Interestingly, this is a speculation on my part. What happened after the death of Judah Maccabee? The other brothers and the Hashmonaim expanded the territory of Israel and eventually reconquered the Hasmoneans, John Hyrcanus and Alexandriana and those guys. They conquered the whole Eretz Yisrael. So the land of the 12 tribes. And beyond that also, they even conquered, the Gaza Strip. They even conquered the Holy of Yarden, including Moab and Ammon. It's interesting. So maybe then created the necessity for synagogues, for people saying, I ain't going to get to you at Beis HaMikdash often. So maybe the idea started in Chutz La'aretz, but then entered Eretz Yisrael through the Hasmonean conquests. And maybe the rabbis went along with it because now you have the Amei Haaretz, you have a lot of conquered peoples who the Hasmoneans, as we know from Josephus, forcibly converted to Judaism, right or wrong. And you can't tell somebody, let's put it this way, they took this pagan group or that pagan group, and they say, okay, now you're Jewish, converted by force or by willing. Until now, they were doing pagan sacrifices, and now you're telling them you can only go to the Beis HaMikdash. They're going to keep up Bamahs, or whatever they do. You understand? That's what's going to happen. This is the whole fight with the Kusim, with the Samaritans, wasn't it? And in that whole mishmash, I conjecture that there evolved the introduction into Israel itself of the synagogue system. That would be my guess. And therefore, it was a historic place to replace the temple when the temple was destroyed on Tisha B'Av. So, in this passage of Moshe Rabbeinu, I've gone a little bit too long. This passage of Moshe Rabbeinu, beginning Ray, we see like a foreshadowing of the tension they have down to nowadays. Although now we live in a time In America and Israel, ish k'chol yosher bein yaseh. So we do not live in a world of regulation. We are actually offended by religious coercion. You want to be from, be from. Don't force me. And don't regulate, tell me how to go. You see this from the blowback in the corona. You know, the government, all the health officials said, don't do this, don't go to weddings, don't make bar mitzvahs. They did. Got to wear a mask, don't do that. They didn't. People, the heck with it, I do whatever I want. Okay, I mean, I get it. Now, that desire for, nobody tell me what to do, in my opinion, would manifest itself today in the large formal synagogue on the one hand versus the local minyan or shtibel on the other. Back in Europe, they only had synagogues. They weren't supposed to have shtibels. But the Hasidim came along and said, doesn't work for us, and therefore we want the spontaneity, we want the shtibel. And eventually they won so much that they even took over the synagogues, as you know. But say in Baltimore, some other place, you say, is it good to daven with 500 other people? Or is it good to daven with 10 other people? It's an existential tension. On the one hand, Barobam Hadris Melech, and imagine Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur when they Heish Me'Rab and all the rest of it. I get that. On the other hand, I don't like it. I don't like the Gabbai. I don't like the Chazan. Nobody consulted me, this and the other. I daven better when I daven with 10 other people or 20 or 30 other people. I daven better when I can look out the window and see the yeshiva across the street. Or I see the tree across the street, or whatever it is. I see a Mississippi River. It doesn't matter. That works for me. So, as always, it's a battle between the individual on the one hand and the collective on the other. As I said before, this is something that doesn't go away. It's just always going to be there. It's just interesting to me to see that Moshe Rabbeinu, in this week's Parsha of all places, comes out in favor of the collective because he's obviously afraid that the Eretz Yisrael will be a klola. You know what I said? The conquest of Eretz Yisrael without the chukim nishpatim will be a klola, and he doesn't want it to be a klola. That leads him to desire, as I said before, the highly centralized and regulatory approach, sort of like a health official saying, oh, you're going to have a lot of bodies from the corona. Lakewood's going to be full of dead people because they're not listening, all the rest of it, versus the other person is like, get off my back. Don't tell me what to do. Don't tell me what to do. This is true because this existential tension is with us today and will be there tomorrow. They say that, in the Gemara it says that the synagogues of Babel will eventually be transported when the Bayis Shlishi comes, the third temple comes. I don't know if they take that literally. Could be. You don't know. And maybe the Shul's will pick up and fly through the air and end up in Eretz Yisrael somehow or other, Yerushalayim. Or it might mean, if you want to be more rationalistic, that the people of those Shuls will come and settle Eretz Yisrael. So nowadays you have, quote unquote, in Yerushalayim, to take one example of many. Every 31 flavors, those. You want a Sephardi minion, you want a Chabad minion, you want a Litvish minion, you want Nusach Morocco, you want Nusach Turkey, Italian, and so on and so forth. So the Hasidim, Batik and Asios, the end of an Eretz Yisrael, you got that already. But on the one hand, that represents the idea, I want to daven the way I'm used to, the way my Avos did. And the other hand, you say, no, there'll be a base of English, everybody should be together in one, in one place. They tell me everybody can't be together in base of English. The third temple must have some kind of technology. Nowadays, and I'll conclude, this is just funny, because of modern technology, it's possible to go back to the Moshe Rabbeinu system. Why? You have a Zoom. With modern technology, we can all watch the carbonates being done or something like that. We can all, by the time they'll finish, they'll have Shabbos clocks up to here, and everybody be able, without crowding each other in the Beis Hamikdash, you'll be able to see the whole Avodas Yom Kippurim in living Technicolor, and and with sound and all the rest of it, and it'll all be kosher because it'll all be Grum or something. I don't know what they'll do, right? I can only imagine. So this is just something, as I say, food for thought. Oh my goodness, I went too long. So anyway, as always, I'll conclude and always thank Mishpachas Stefanski for the constant sponsorship, and I hope after this to get to the next Genozim auction item. And with that, I wish you all a good day.